Alright guys, so this is going to be your photosynthesis review. Now, photosynthesis is a very important topic, especially when we move on to cellular respiration, the next chapter. But photosynthesis is pretty much we're making our sugar molecules, plants are, from sunlight and carbon dioxide with a little bit of water. So let's talk about this. Now, first thing we want to talk about is our high energy molecules. So ATP is our energy molecule inside of the cell. And the reason that it has so much energy is because it has 3 phosphate bonds. And these phosphate bonds, they store the energy, okay? The more bonds they have, the more energy they have. Now, ADP is more of a carrier molecule, okay? So ADP is when ATP is used up for its energy. ADP is formed to kind of recharge the batteries. So if we look here, ATP has a very large amount of battery. It's like a full battery, whereas ADP is more of a partially charged battery. Again, less phosphates, less energy. More phosphates, 3 of them, more energy. Now, organisms obtain energy a different way. So heterotrophs, they need to eat their food. Okay, so for example, a bear eats a fish, a bear eats berries, we eat lunch, okay? We need to get their food from something else. Chemotrophs get their energy from chemicals in the environment. All right, so the example of this is our tube worms. Now, tube worms are associated with volcanic vents. They take sulfur and convert it to energy. So in other words, they use chemicals to make their energy. Now, autotrophs are what we talk about in photosynthesis. And autotrophs make their own food. And they make their food from doing the process of photosynthesis. So the equation for photosynthesis is as follows. So we take 6 CO2 molecules, which is carbon dioxide. We add that with 6 water molecules. Okay, in order for this reaction to occur, we need light. Okay, and what we make is a glucose molecule. And 6 oxygen molecules. Okay, so again, this is our equation right here, 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O with light, glucose, and oxygen. So photosynthesis, the overall goal of photosynthesis is to make carbohydrates. And in this case, our carbohydrates are sugars in the form of glucose. So we use sunlight to do this process. Again, we're taking sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water and turning it into glucose and oxygen. Now, let's look at the parts of the cell here. So chloroplast is the organelle in plants where photosynthesis occurs. Okay, it's this guy right here. Now, let's label these things. Let's start with the thylakoid. So the thylakoid is let's use a different color here, is one individual, I call them pancake, of the stack, okay? And the thylakoid membrane is where our light reaction occurs. Now the granum, I always say grandma makes the stack of pancakes. So the granum is the stack of thylakoids. And the stroma is a little bit different. The stroma is the liquid inside of the chloroplast. And that is where the dark reaction occurs. So we have the granum, thylakoid, and stroma. Now, the light-dependent reaction, this occurs in the thylakoid membrane. Okay, so the membrane of that. And what ends up happening in this reaction is ATP and NADPH are formed, and these are energy molecules. Now, these molecules are used in the dark reaction to produce our glucose. But what ends up happening is light ends up coming in and exciting photosystem 1 and 2. And what this does, and the overall scheme of this is, we get a high concentration of hydrogen ions inside the cell than outside the cell. And you can see we're forming our NADPH here. Now, what happens with this high concentration of hydrogen ions is they then flow back through our ATP synthase, and this is our enzyme that ATP is produced. So they flow through there, and ATP is turned into, or ADP is turned into ATP from this movement of hydrogen molecules. So it makes ATP in the light reaction by doing this. So again, at the end of the light reaction, we've made ATP and NADPH. Now in the dark reaction, we're taking that ATP and NADPH and we're adding it into the Calvin cycle. And what happens is we're using that energy from those two molecules to make glucose. And we have to fix glucose in this, because what happens is we take CO2 from the atmosphere and we take this carbon, break it apart, and rearrange it to make our glucose molecule. Okay? So again, we use ATP, NADPH to do that. Now, these two reactions, let's kind of talk about the overall what happens. In the light reaction, we make ATP and NADPH. And we make that from adding in water, H2O, and what we produce as a byproduct is oxygen, okay? So in the light reaction, we're making this ATP, NADPH, and what this is doing is we're adding that into the Calvin cycle. Now in the Calvin cycle, we're adding CO2. This is where our carbon comes from. And we're using that ATP, NADPH to produce glucose. Glucose is our overall end product that we have. Now, there's a couple different factors that influence photosynthesis. Now, light intensity. So as light intensity increases, okay, our photosynthesis starts to rise. But eventually what happens is it reaches a point where photosynthesis can't work any faster, so it balances out and it plateaus. Okay, same thing happens with carbon dioxide levels. Now, carbon dioxide we need for the whole photosynthesis process. As it increases, it's going to increase till eventually it plateaus until photosynthesis can't work any faster. Now, temperature is a little different. Now, at extreme low temperatures and extreme high temperatures, no photosynthesis is going to occur. So what happens is photosynthesis increasing as temperature increases. When we roughly reach a temperature of, I think it's around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, that's our optimal range. Once we start getting any higher than that, our rate starts to decline off. So again, photosynthesis, overall goal of photosynthesis is to make glucose. We do this in two reactions, the light reaction and the dark reaction. Light reaction, we're producing ATP, NADPH. We use that to get added into the dark reaction, which ends up making glucose. Once we make glucose, ADP and NADP get sent back into the light reaction and the process repeats itself. So I hope this helps. I hope this kind of gives you a little general information on photosynthesis for your upcoming quiz. This is Mr. O'Brien, signing off.